Welcome to worst to best video here on Rauta. This time we're going through one of my favorite bands, Bolt Thrower from United Kingdom. Now this band has ceased to exist already a few years ago, so I was figuring out maybe I should actually talk about this band, because now since Memoriam has taken over basically the legacy of Bolt Thrower, and Bolt Thrower is no more, why not go through the whole discography and talk about it, because after all, it is one of my favorite bands. So during late summer I was going through the whole discography basically, except for the first album, because that was not on Spotify. I was mainly listening to these albums when I was working outside, driving my car and all that stuff. So different situations, but it was more of a reminiscence session rather than anything else, because obviously I'm already familiar with the music, and as such it's not like I'm listening to the new albums. I just had to make sure I was putting them in the right order, in my opinion, before making this video, obviously. So Bolt Thrower existed from 1986 until about 2016, where they played, I guess, their last shows. However, Memoriam, which since took over with the original drummer anyway, and the main vocalist Carl Willets. I've already, by the way, thought Carl Willets being the original vocalist, but I learned before making this video that he was not exactly the original one. Joined as early as 1987. He still wasn't the one doing the early demos. However, Carl Willets is the man who is known for the voice of Bolt Thrower, so there you have it. But anyway, since Memoriam consists of ex-Bolt Thrower members, Andy Whale and Carl Willets, plus some other members, it was kind of an excuse to talk to you about Bolt Thrower. Now, I've gathered all the discography here, which is not every time the case here with doing these kind of videos, because obviously I don't have all discographies, but this is one of the rare few bands where I actually have all the albums. I actually wanted to bring one of the bonus CDs, which is also Bolt Thrower, but not so much part of this discography thing. This is kind of a compilation, which I think the band didn't actually approve at the time. Who dares wins. What I want to mention is this, that even though this is not a full album and not as such part of this discographic tour worst to best, it's worth mentioning that this is a compilation which I think people who are into Bolt Thrower maybe have missed, and yet still should take a look, because after all it's an interesting compilation with some good tunes from the band. But now to the actual order of the Bolt Thrower albums, according to me anyway. As many of you know, Bolt Thrower started their recording career in the late 80s, and their first album is as early as 1988. This one is very raw in nature, very old school death metal, and it's called "In Battle There Is No Law" with an exclamation mark. Now let's take a look at this horrible cover. I mean, at the same time it's kind of a cool as it is kind of ugly. And it's very much of this 80s vibe. Notice also how the band had this kind of logo going from one edge to another and changing the direction in the corner. Kind of a funny thing. Now, why this was first? Because it's actually, in my opinion, the worst of Bolt Thrower, which is still a good album. This is very much like a band that has already stepped from their demo phase, to actual album, and in my opinion they were ready to do it. Some bands obviously were not when they were doing their first album, but I think Bolt Thrower already had created their own style with this album and they were ready to do it. This looks very cheapish, which I guess it was in a way, low budget and all that stuff, but even though it's kind of a raw sound and overall production, I think it was quite a nice way to pave the way for this kind of British death metal. However, it was not for the first album I got to know Bolt Thrower. This was one of the albums that I actually visited among the last ones, I guess. So I was kind of like, will it actually go for me because I never got into that much to like their Peel sessions, which were preceding this one. But anyway, I think that's a quite good debut album. But it was raw, there was no logo, and everything was a little bit of this and that. Which brings to me the album that actually presented me Bolt Thrower back in the 80s. Or maybe it was early 90s, I'm not exactly sure. Let's put it this somewhere between 1989, maybe 1990, 91, and 1 even. Anyway, I was about 15, 16, maybe 14, not sure. But here we have it, Bolt Thrower Realm of Chaos. And why I was introduced to this album was because of the tabletop game by Games Workshop, which actually had something to do with the album. Actually, you can see their logo on the backside, even though it was an era release. The funny thing is, an anecdote which I guess many know, this cover is originally from Games Workshop miniature game about future wars and conflicts, very much what the lyrics were all about. And the band members had sort of a hobby, I guess, with these miniature games. Maybe role-playing games as well, I'm not exactly sure. But anyway, because of this cover, which was originally from this game, and I knew the game before I knew the band, I mean, there was kind of a connection I had to check out. But this music was way too brutal for young little Jerry. So it took me quite a few years to actually got to like this. Around the early 90s, late 80s, I think it was probably 1990 or 1991. It was too brutal for me. It was too heavy, too much growly vocals and all that stuff. But in a couple of years, everything changed because, you know, I got more around with extreme metal and all that stuff. And suddenly it was really good. So this has kind of a special place in my heart. But still, this is the second worst Bolt Thrower album. A good one. Very much in the vein of In Battle There Is No Law with exclamation mark. But just a tad bit better, because everything was a bit better, even though the sound is very, very dark, and it's kind of a mushy in a way that you can get a little bored with it. But anyway, I still like it, but it's not among my favorites. This is kind of a funny, because my third one would be the third album by Bolt Thrower called Warmaster. It clearly continues with the same colorful fantasy roleplay theme, but this is not anymore a Games Workshop cover, even though it totally reminds me of those covers. This came already in 1991, and I think this was among the first ones I actually got to hear. And to me, it kind of showed better, overall band performance. It was not so much about creating the same pattern all over again, but more versatile type of Bolt Thrower. I mean, the riffs had more breathing space, if you know what I mean. Even the tempo was sometimes slow. It was very, very heavy, very brutal, kind of like what tanks are. They are heavy as hell and they are slow. So this is more much like a kind of a tank of metal albums. And I think that's why it kind of caught me liking it very much. More than Realms of Chaos, but not as much as the albums that were coming out later. Then a quick jump to Future, and something happened. Anna Vala Pride. Once again, continuing with this kind of fantasy type of war, future war machinery and all that stuff. This featured vocalist Dave Ingram of Benediction fame, because Carl Willits had left the band. This came in 2001, and it was kind of a shock to hear different vocalists doing Bolt Thrower. After all, by this time we had already more than 10 years of Bolt Thrower going on. You know, kind of a war, death metal originators doing what Bolt Thrower were doing. Much more melodic, but still very heavy, very catchy, and kind of a memorable stuff. But with a different vocalist, it was kind of a culture shock. It was something totally different, and it took me a while to kind of get into. But now that I was listening to it again, I remember what happened to me back in the this around 2002 or whatever, when I got to review this album actually, was that after a while you get used to Ingram's voice, because it's not bad, it's just different than Carl Willett's voice. And in my opinion, Ingram could have totally taken the throne. I mean, it's not the same, you cannot really replace Carl Willett, and obviously people were disappointed. Some people still are, and maybe consider this one as the worst Bolt Thrower album. But I think it's very, very solid album, and better than the first three of them. It's just a little bit different because of the different vocalist. But it's very much on par with the same album, the next album, I mean, which actually preceded it. And this is Mercenary, which then again has more, I don't know, maybe graphic novel type of cover, reminding me of some of those war story, short stories and comic books with its more realistic graphics. And also on the backside, it's still having this kind of a Chaos logo, which was very much present early days of Bolt Thrower. And same goes for the CD, by the way. So it's like Bolt Thrower has had this war theme going on throughout their career, 30 years of war. I think war metal would actually suit Bolt Thrower very well. But the themes, how they had their covers done, I mean, from future warfare to fantasy warfare, then kind of a realistic approach. I think it's very, very nice how they went from one idea of war machinery, soldiers, war machines, guns, just, warring all the time. Now, when it comes to the actual album, I think Mercenary is one of the better ones, and it was very much continuing where I think For Victory left in 1994. Now, Mercenary came in 1998, so there was a kind of a big gap between those albums, considering that first came 1988, came in the Battle There Is No Law, quickly followed by Realm of Chaos in 1989, 1989, and Warmaster in 1991, followed by Fourth Crusade 1992, and 1994 for Victory. My point here is they came out with like almost every year or every second year, and suddenly between 94 and 98 there was this gap. And after Mercenary, Carl Willett left. Yet still Honorable Pride came like 3 years later. So there was they were kind of a slowing down. Maybe adulthood hit them. I don't know really. Don't really care. Fans don't give a damn about excuses. We just want goddamn music. Which brings me to their next album, in this list anyway, which is called Those Once Loyal, the swan song of the band. Came out in 2005, very much continuing the path that was going already with Mercenary, Honorable Pride, or even For Victory. And when we're talking about covers, take a look at this fine, kind of a, not colorful, but kind of a glossy cover here. It's kind of a homage to these British soldiers, and very much has this kind of old school war feeling, even though it's not fantasy warfare or like medieval warfare, but I think Second World War, maybe first one, I'm not really sure, I'm not war history expert by no means, but this album I think kind of nailed it. It was one of those peak moments where Bolt Thrower was totally doing their own style, and I don't think they could have even evolved with that style anymore, because after all, what they had done with For Victory, going very melodic and still also very catchy and kind of a heavy mid-tempo death metal, all albums that came after that were just more like different variations, versions even, of what was happening. And I think Those Once Loyal totally was fitting for being their swan song. I mean, I'm sorry that they left it there, because obviously I was one of the many expecting more Bolt Thrower to happen. I think it was 2006 when I finally got to see the band on stage, and I had no clue by that time they had already released their last album. In hindsight, it makes me think like very nostalgic and kind of a melancholic even, because I'm such a big fan of the band, and little did I know that it was already done by that time. but that's how it goes sometimes. Then we go to the top 2 of my Bolt Thrower albums, and here would be the 4th Crusade, the 4th album by the band. Now, consider this cover after Warmaster, which was very comic-like. Now we have an actual painting here, and this is once again more of the older war themes. And once again, the chaos is very much present here and here. So once again, the chaos team has been going through Bolt Thrower years and the war with different themes. But as an album, I think 4th Crusade was kind of a changer, game changer even. I mean, after Warmaster's very raw death metal approach, suddenly 4th Crusade was way heavily produced. I mean, it was really, I think it's their heaviest album. Very, very heavy, very brutal, very dark, and full of war. Excellent vocals, excellent production, and I think this could have been the Bolt Thrower album if it wasn't the one that followed after this one. This came in 1992, also one of my among my first Bolt Thrower albums with Warmaster and Realms of Chaos. I even remember recording a video from MTV's, that is music television, Headbanger's Ball. I'm not sure which song it was, probably not the title track. No, I don't remember, but anyway, I just remember recording that on a VHS tape, you know, VCR, and it was like, whoa, this is so heavy, this is so brutal, so dark. Really a game changer. And after that, they still changed their style towards kind of a lighter, catchier, more melodic style, which would be, you know it already because I've said it a couple of times, For Victory. And this time they had a photography as cover, and this is, I think, from the war when United Kingdom had feud with Argentina on that sad little island on the east side of South America, whatever it's called, can't remember right now. You will anyway. The point here is this was once again totally different approach, not only because of the cover but because of the music. Like I said, it was catchier, it was more melodic, and I think this is the album where the band actually had the peak moment. They created the perfect Bolt Thrower blend, and as such, this is very close to me being 10 out of 10 albums. If I would change the scale, I would say this is 5 out of 5 albums. That is near perfect an album. And throughout the years, I've been listening to this album many times, never got bored of it. It's almost like the death metal version of what Slayer did with their Rain in Blood. And I have still changed the original album. For example, this is some version which has the second album and the jewel case is broken and all that stuff, because I wanted to have more Bolt Thrower. So this is actually one with a live bonus CD. I don't think I actually ever listened to that more than a couple of times, but I had to get more Bolt Thrower. So obviously I kind of updated the original ones. That is why, you know, I think it's kind of shows how much I actually love this album. Like I said, been there like through it multiple times, and now that I was once again listening to it during late summer, I was like kind of blown away how perfect this album, or near perfect, it is. I mean, it's catchy, it's heavy, it's just awesome with its production, vocals, lyrics. I don't think there will be ever better war metal band than what Bolt Thrower was. Sadly, was. Memoriam, at best, it's getting closer to what Bolt Thrower was at its weakest. So there's a still long way ahead, but I don't think that lineup can actually beat or even catch up with Bolt Thrower. It's kind of a sad thing, but then again, 8 albums which are all good enough for my collection. I cannot really bitch about it. Of course, I could always say, please do more. But would they? No, of course not. But anyway, this is my take on Bolt Thrower from worst to best. Looking forward to hear what you think of this great band. And if you're too young to have totally missed this band, but you consider still yourself a death metal head, go check it out. I know, way too lengthy video and all that stuff, but take care, enjoy some bolt thrower and horns up.